disappeared in the sea for weeks, but it wasn't water I saw there. It all began on a morning I'll never forget, but for reasons I still don't completely understand. I was just like any other person, going about my day, waking up to the usual sounds of waves crashing against the shoreline of Huntington Beach. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the sand, the water, and the world I thought I knew. Little did I know, this would be the last morning I would ever truly feel at ease. I had been surfing with friends, my mind more focused on the waves than anything else. The salty ocean breeze, the feeling of the water rushing past me, it all felt like home. But there was a strange sensation I couldn't shake, a sense that something was wrong. It was as if the universe itself was warning me, whispering through the wind, but I was too caught up in the moment to listen. As I paddled out farther into the surf, the water growing colder by the minute, the feeling of unease deepened. It happened so quickly, I didn't even see it coming. One moment, I was gliding across the surface of the water, riding a perfect wave, and the next, I was sucked under. I can still feel it now, the way the water closed over me, so cold, so dark. I was disoriented at first, struggling to find the surface, but the ocean was pulling me deeper. It felt as if the water itself was alive, as if it had a will of its own, pulling me away from everything I knew. In those moments, time seemed to slow down. I could hear nothing but the rush of water in my ears, my heartbeat pounding in my chest like a drum. The panic started to set in, but there was no way out. It was as if the sea had swallowed me whole, and I was destined to sink forever. I couldn't tell which way was up. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, and just as I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I felt something other than the water. It wasn't just the pressure of the ocean surrounding me. No, it was a presence, a force, almost like a hand pulling me deeper. Not in the way the ocean had, but gently, as if it was guiding me. I tried to fight it, to break free from this force, but it was as if I didn't have the strength to resist. My mind was clouded, and just before I lost consciousness, I had one final thought. Is this how it ends? When I woke up, everything was different. I wasn't in the water anymore. I wasn't even anywhere near the beach. I was lying on cold, hard ground, my body aching as if I had been through a storm. The air was thick, suffocating, and the temperature was oppressively hot. I opened my eyes, but the light didn't seem right. It wasn't the soft morning glow I was used to. No, it was a harsh golden light, almost unnatural. I sat up, feeling a wave of dizziness rush over me. I blinked, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but nothing looked familiar. The landscape was barren, the ground cracked and parched. I looked around, but there was no water, no beach, nothing that resembled the world I had known. The horizon stretched out endlessly in every direction, like a wasteland. I couldn't even see a single tree or a patch of green. It was as if I had been transported to another world entirely, or worse, as if I had never left. My heart started to race. Where am I thought, but no answer came. I reached out, touching the ground, hoping for some clue, but nothing. The soil beneath my fingers was dry, almost powdery. I stood up, taking tentative steps, my legs weak beneath me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to find some way back to safety. But where could I go? There was nothing here but endless emptiness. The air was thick with an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. No birds, no animals, not even the sound of wind. Just a silence so complete that it was deafening. As I took another step, I noticed something strange. There was a faint glow emanating from the ground, as though something was hidden beneath the dry surface. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt, and there it was. A symbol. It was carved into the earth itself, faint but unmistakable. I traced my fingers over the shape, feeling a cold chill run through me as I did. It was as if the symbol was alive, its energy radiating outwards, almost calling to me. I jerked my hand back, startled by the sensation. What the hell was this? Where was I? I could feel a rising panic in my chest, but I pushed it down, focusing instead on what I needed to do. I had to find out where I was, how I had ended up here, and, most importantly, how to get back. I started walking again, my mind racing with questions. I kept telling myself this was just a dream, that I'd wake up any moment, but the pain in my body, the dryness in my mouth, and the overwhelming sense of wrongness around me told me otherwise. This was real. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could just wake up from. And then, just as I was about to lose hope, I felt something, a presence once again. This time, it wasn't a guiding force, but a heavy weight pressing down on me. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt their gaze. Something was watching me. I turned around, expecting to see a person or some kind of creature, but there was nothing there. Only the endless wasteland stretched out before me. But the feeling wouldn't leave. I wasn't alone. The first few days after my disappearance were a blur. I had returned home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Everything was the same, but nothing was. My friends, my family, they were all here, yet they didn't seem to recognize the person who had returned to them, or rather, the person I had become. I had expected to be greeted with relief, joy, perhaps even disbelief, but instead there was a strange silence. My mother's eyes, wide with concern, darted between me and my father, who had remained eerily quiet. It was as though they were afraid to say anything, afraid to acknowledge the unspoken truth that hung between us all. My return wasn't greeted with the warmth I had anticipated. I had changed, that much was obvious. But what disturbed me the most was how little I could remember of my time away. There were gaps in my memory, large swaths of time that were simply blank, as though my mind had shut down and refused to process what had happened. I tried to focus on the fragments of memories that still lingered in my mind. The strange golden light, the emptiness, the feeling of something watching me. But each time I tried to remember more, my mind would snap back, as if there was something I wasn't supposed to know. The harder I tried, the more elusive it became. And then the dreams began. At first, they were subtle. Flickering images, distorted faces that seemed to belong to a different time. Places I had never been, people I had never met. But the more I tried to forget about them, the stronger they became. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. I could still feel the weight of the dream pressing down on me. The air was thick, suffocating, and there was a figure standing before me, just out of reach. I could feel its presence even as I awoke, a sense of dread creeping over me. The figure didn't speak, but I understood its message. It wasn't over. I thought it was just a nightmare, but when the dreams kept coming, more vivid, more real, something inside me shifted. These weren't just dreams, they were memories. Or at least they felt like memories. Memories of a time I had never lived, of places I had never seen. One night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the truth hit me. It wasn't just the memories that had changed, it was me. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had disappeared. Something had happened to me during those missing weeks. Something that couldn't be explained. something that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fully comprehend. But I wasn't the only one who noticed. A few days after my return, I found a mark on my arm. It was faint at first, just a small red patch of skin. But as the days passed, it grew darker, more defined. I tried to ignore it at first, brushing it off as a bruise or some kind of skin irritation. But when I looked closer, I saw something that made my heart stop. It wasn't a bruise. It wasn't even a scar. It was a symbol, a mark that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, as if it was alive. I couldn't remember how it got there, but somehow I knew it wasn't something I had seen before. I thought about showing it to my family, but the hesitation lingered. They had already been acting strange around me. My mother, especially, seemed afraid of me, as if she knew I was different, even if I didn't understand how. There were moments when I caught her staring at me, her face filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something I couldn't place. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her what was wrong, but I was too afraid of the answer. What if she saw me as something other than her son? What if I wasn't the person I used to be? As the days wore on, the mark on my arm grew more intense. I couldn't hide it anymore, not from myself, and certainly not from my family. One evening after dinner, my father finally confronted me. He was quiet at first, watching me from across the table, his brow furrowed with concern. "Son," he said, his voice shaky, "we need to talk about something. Something's not right. You've been acting different, and this thing on your arm, it's like nothing I've ever seen before." I didn't know how to respond. The words were stuck in my throat, and the weight of everything, the disappearance, the dreams, the mark, pressed down on me like a heavy stone. "I don't know what happened," I finally whispered. "I don't remember everything, but I know it wasn't just the sea. There was something else, something strange." My father didn't say anything at first. He just nodded slowly, as though he understood more than I realized. "You're not the same," he muttered almost to himself, "and neither is this world." The words chilled me. What did he mean by that? What had happened to me during those weeks I had been gone? What had changed? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling once again, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered my name. "It's not over yet." I jerked upright in bed, my heart racing. The room was dark, the silence oppressive, but there was no mistaking it. The voice had come from inside my own mind, and it wasn't the first time I had heard it. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt a deep, gnawing dread settle in the pit of my stomach. Whatever had happened to me, whatever force had taken me, it wasn't done. I was still part of something bigger, something darker, and I had no idea what that something was. The dreams grew more intense as the days passed, each one more vivid than the last. They started to feel less like dreams and more like memories. Memories that didn't belong to me, yet felt like they were mine. I saw things, places, and faces that were completely unfamiliar, yet they felt so real, as though I had lived them before. One night, the dream took me somewhere different. It was no longer the empty golden wasteland I had seen before. This time, I was standing in the middle of a battlefield. The air was thick with smoke, the ground was littered with debris, and all around me were figures in ragged clothing, their faces covered in dirt and blood. They looked like soldiers, but there was something otherworldly about them, as if they were not of this time, not of this place. The sounds of battle were deafening. There were explosions in the distance, the clash of metal against metal and the cries of people in pain. But amidst all the chaos, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't scared, nor was I confused. I just knew what I was seeing. I understood it. I was in the middle of something important, something that had happened long before I was born. And then I saw him. He was standing in the distance, his figure barely visible through the smoke. But I could feel him, as if he were calling to me. There was something familiar about him, something I couldn't quite place. But I felt drawn to him. As I walked toward him, the battlefield around me seemed to fade away, the sounds of war silencing as I moved closer. When I finally reached him, I saw his face clearly. His eyes were filled with sorrow, his expression worn from the weight of the world. He looked like a man who had seen too much, but there was something else in his gaze, something that made me feel as if I had known him for a lifetime. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, as though waiting for something, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. You were meant to see this. I didn't understand what he meant. Who was he? Why was he telling me this? But before I could ask, everything around me started to dissolve. The battlefield, the smoke, the soldiers, they all disappeared, fading into nothingness as if they had never been there at all. The man's face lingered for a moment, his words echoing in my mind, before he too vanished. I woke up with a jolt, my heart pounding in my chest, sweat covering my body. The dream had been so real, so vivid, that for a moment I wasn't sure if I had been asleep at all. I sat up in bed, my breath coming in short gasps, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. It was the third time I had seen him. The first time, I had dismissed it as a random nightmare. The second time, I had tried to brush it off as some weird manifestation of my mind, struggling to cope with the events of the past few weeks. But now, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had happened to me during those missing weeks. I wasn't just missing time. I had experienced something that I couldn't explain, something that seemed to transcend the boundaries of reality itself. And the worst part was, the more I tried to push it away, the more real it became. Over the next few days, I tried to go back to my normal life. I spent time with my friends, my family, pretending like everything was fine, even though nothing felt the same. The mark on my arm continued to glow faintly, its symbol more defined than ever. I could feel it pulling at me, as if it were beckoning me to do something, to go somewhere. And then, one day, I found it. I'd been going through some old books in the attic when I came across a journal that wasn't mine. It was old, its pages yellowed with age, the leather cover worn and cracked. The handwriting inside was neat, almost too neat, as if it had been written in a different time. I opened the journal, flipping through the pages, and something caught my eye. There, on the last page, was a symbol, the same symbol that was burned into my skin. I felt my stomach drop as I stared at it, unable to tear my eyes away. I knew what I had to do. I needed to find out who had written this journal, and why this symbol was so important. I went to the local library the next day, determined to dig deeper. After hours of searching, I finally found something, a historical record buried in the back of the archives. It detailed the disappearance of several people, all of whom had vanished under strange circumstances. They had all been found weeks later, just like me, with no memory of where they had been or what had happened. But what was even more unsettling was the fact that some of them had reported seeing visions of the past, of places they couldn't have known about, and of people who didn't exist in their time. One of the records mentioned a man, a soldier, who had been seen in the visions of a woman who had disappeared. The soldier was described as having the same sorrowful eyes I had seen in my dreams. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It seemed like too much of a coincidence. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there were still so many unanswered questions. Had I been part of something like this before? Was this part of some larger pattern? Some cosmic force that I had no control over? Was I connected to the soldier in my dreams? Was he trying to tell me something important? The more I dug, the more questions I had. The more I tried to make sense of it all, the more it felt like I was on the edge of something huge, something world-shattering. I couldn't tell anyone about it. I couldn't explain it. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same person who had disappeared. When I returned home, the familiar sights and sounds of my town should have been comforting. Yet, everything felt alien to me. The houses looked the same, but something was off. The faces of my friends and family, people I had known all my life, seemed distant, unfamiliar. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the world had shifted, and I was now a stranger in my own life. The first few hours were a blur. My parents greeted me, their faces a mix of relief and confusion. But the look in their eyes, especially my mother's, made me uneasy. She wasn't smiling like I thought she would. Instead, there was an underlying tension, something unspoken in the air that I couldn't put my finger on. "You're back," she said softly, her voice trembling. "We thought we lost you." I nodded, unable to find the right words to explain what had happened. How could I? How could I explain the weeks I had lost? The time that had slipped away from me as if it had never existed. The world I had come back to didn't feel real anymore. I didn't feel real anymore. After a few hours, they left me alone in my room. I sat on the bed trying to collect my thoughts. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Everything I had seen during those missing weeks, the strange place, the golden light, the battlefields and the soldier, felt like distant memories now. But the mark on my arm, the symbol, was a constant reminder that something had happened, something that I couldn't fully comprehend. I stared at the symbol, feeling its presence. It had been glowing faintly ever since I'd returned, but now it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The sensation was almost too much to bear. It felt like the mark was calling to me, urging me to uncover its meaning. But how? Where did I even start? The next few days were a blur of questions. I tried to talk to my parents about what had happened, but they didn't understand. They thought I was suffering from some kind of trauma or post-traumatic stress. They didn't realize that something more than trauma was at work here. They couldn't understand the weight of the strange experiences I had endured. One evening, after dinner, I overheard my parents talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught enough to make my blood run cold. "She's not the same," my father said, his voice filled with concern. "Something's different about her. I can feel it. It's like she's not really here. Not fully." I froze. They were talking about me, about the me who had returned. The person they were calling their daughter didn't seem like the person they had lost. My mother's voice trembled as she replied, "I've seen it too. The way she looks at me, like she doesn't remember everything, like she's seeing the world through someone else's eyes." My heart pounded in my chest. What was happening to me? Was I slipping away? Was I becoming someone else entirely? The conversation ended with a long silence. I felt like an intruder in my own home, eavesdropping on a conversation that was meant to stay private. But now, more than ever, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't the same person who had disappeared, and neither was the world I had returned to. The next day, I went to the library again, searching for answers. I had to know more about the symbol, about the strange experiences, about the time I had lost. I needed to find out if others had gone through what I was experiencing. And that's when I found it. Buried in an old history book, tucked away in the back of the library's archives, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The book contained references to a series of disappearances that had occurred in the area over the past several decades. But what struck me the most was the consistency in the stories. Every person who had disappeared came back with the same unexplainable experiences, and every one of them had a symbol burned into their skin, just like mine. I read on, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. According to the book, these disappearances weren't random. They were part of a pattern that involved people vanishing from our world and returning with knowledge of events that hadn't yet happened, or in some cases, of events that had happened long before their time. The more I read, the more I realized the implications. These weren't just disappearances, they were time shifts. Time had been altered, and the people who had returned from these shifts were never the same again. They had seen things that defied explanation. And now I was one of them. But there was more. The journal I had found, the one with the symbol on the last page, wasn't just a random collection of thoughts. It was the work of someone who had gone through this same experience. Someone who had seen the same things I had seen. And as I read through the entries, I came across a name, the Soldier. The Soldier was not a figment of my imagination. He was real. He had appeared in the visions of every person who had disappeared. And his message was always the same. You were meant to see this. I shuddered, closing the book in my hands. The reality of what I had uncovered was too much to bear. I had been part of something much larger than myself. Something that involved not just time travel, but the very fabric of reality itself. And the Soldier, the man I had seen in my dreams, was somehow connected to all of this. He was trying to tell me something, but I didn't know what. As I sat in the library, trying to make sense of it all, I felt a shift in the air. It wasn't a physical change, but a mental one. Something had clicked, like a door had opened in my mind. I knew I had to find the Soldier. I had to understand why I had seen him, why I was chosen to be a part of this. But where do you even begin when time itself is broken? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. My life had changed forever. The more I tried to piece together the fragmented memories of my time away, the more I realized that the truth I was uncovering wasn't just about me. It was about something much bigger. The strange events, the symbol on my arm, the soldier who had appeared in my dreams, they all pointed to one thing. Time was not as fixed as I had once believed. After the discovery in the library, the pieces started to fall into place. The disappearances, the recurring visions, the unexplained symbols. It all made sense in a way I couldn't have imagined before. I had not only traveled through time, but I had also experienced something far more profound. Something that made the world I had returned to feel foreign, like a dream that I couldn't wake up from. The more I researched, the more I uncovered about the phenomenon of time shifts. It wasn't just a freak accident. It was a pattern, a process that, while rare, had occurred throughout history. People like me, who had vanished under mysterious circumstances, only to return with memories of events that shouldn't have happened. People who had been caught in the ripples of time itself, experiencing realities from different points in history, from both the past and the future. And as I learned more about it, the question that haunted me became clearer. How was I connected to all of this? There had to be an explanation. There had to be a reason why I had been chosen. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. But what was different about my experience? What did the soldier want me to understand? The answers, I realized, might lie in the symbol that had burned itself into my skin, the symbol that had been glowing faintly since the moment I returned. It was a constant reminder that something deeper was at play, something beyond the limits of time and space. The more I stared at it, the more I felt that I needed to find out what it meant. It wasn't just a mark. It was a key to unlocking the mystery of my disappearance and the force that had brought me back. I knew I had to act quickly. The longer I waited, the more the world around me seemed to shift. The lines between past, present, and future were becoming blurred, and I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I felt as though I was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking out into a world I couldn't fully comprehend. Yet I was inexplicably drawn to it. In the dead of night, I ventured to the place where I had first woken up, the spot where I had felt the strange pull of the symbol. It had to be significant. Everything in my gut told me that this was the place where I would uncover the truth. I took a flashlight and walked out into the darkness, the quiet of the night surrounding me. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was waiting for something to happen. When I arrived at the location, my heart raced. The ground beneath my feet was cracked, just as I had remembered it from my time away. The symbol, faint at first, now glowed with an eerie light, as though it had been waiting for me. I knelt down and ran my fingers over it, feeling a strange sensation ripple through my body. It was as if the symbol was alive, as if it had been calling to me, drawing me in. That's when I felt it. The presence. The same presence I had felt before, when I was lost in the wasteland, when I was pulled through time. It was here, now, watching me. I wasn't alone, but this time I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I closed my eyes, allowing the feeling to wash over me. In that moment, everything changed. The world around me shifted, and I felt as though I were no longer on Earth. I was floating, weightless, suspended between dimensions. I saw flashes of images, cities I had never visited, people I had never met, events I had never witnessed. But through it all, one figure stood out above the rest, the soldier. He was there again, his face filled with sorrow. But this time, there was something else in his eyes. There was a sense of urgency, as though he was trying to communicate something to me. Something vital. I reached out to him, but he didn't speak. Instead, the world around us began to crumble, the images fading into darkness. The soldier's face disappeared, and I was left alone in the void. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on solid ground. The symbol had disappeared from my arm, but I felt its presence more strongly than ever. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but one thing was clear. I had crossed a threshold. I had glimpsed something beyond time itself, something that existed outside the boundaries of reality. I didn't understand it completely, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had been a part of something much larger than myself, something that connected me to the fabric of time in ways I couldn't explain. I had witnessed a part of history, a part of the future, a part of the unknown, and now I was left with more questions than answers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the key to understanding everything lay in the soldier's message. You were meant to see this. What did it mean? Why had I been chosen to witness this glimpse into the unknown? And what did I do now? The answers were out there, hidden in the threads of time, and I had to find them. As the days passed after my strange encounter with the symbol and the soldier, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't alone. The air around me felt charged, like electricity ran just beneath the surface, waiting for something to break it. At night, I would lie awake, staring into the darkness, feeling eyes on me, though when I turned around, I saw nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, a result of the stress I was under. After all, I had been through so much. I had disappeared for weeks, experienced time shifting in ways that defied logic, and encountered a mysterious figure who seemed to be part of something much larger than myself. Of course, my mind was playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. I knew something was wrong. I was being followed, stalked by a presence I couldn't see but could feel with every step I took. The feeling was subtle at first, just a chill down my spine, a shiver that would pass as quickly as it came. But it grew stronger, more persistent, until I could no longer ignore it. I wasn't imagining it. Something was there. One night, I decided to confront it. I couldn't stand the tension any longer. I needed to know what was following me, what had been watching me since I returned. I went outside, determined to face whatever it was head on. The air was thick with humidity, the sky clouded over, and a faint mist lingered in the distance. Everything seemed strangely still, as though the world was holding its breath. I stepped outside and walked to the backyard, my footsteps muffled by the grass beneath my feet. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was waiting for me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring into the darkness. The wind had stopped, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. And then, just as I was about to turn around, I saw it. A flicker, a shadow moving just beyond the reach of the light. I froze, my heart racing. The figure was tall, its shape indistinct, like a blur in the night. But I could feel it, its presence strong and undeniable. It wasn't human, at least not in the way I understood. There was something otherworldly about it, something that sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment I stood paralyzed, unsure of what to do. But then something inside me pushed me forward. I wasn't going to run. I had faced enough of the unknown, enough of the strange and inexplicable, to let fear control me now. I was going to find out what this thing wanted. I stepped closer, my footsteps slow but determined. As I moved forward, the shadow seemed to shift, moving with me, keeping just enough distance to stay out of my reach. It was toying with me. I could feel it, the way it circled around me, always staying just beyond my grasp, always watching. And then it spoke. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. There were no words, no sound, but I heard it nonetheless. It was in my mind, a presence that pressed against my consciousness, overwhelming me. The words were clear, though not spoken aloud. You don't understand yet, but you will. I froze, the words echoing in my head. What did it mean? What was it trying to tell me? I could feel the presence, stronger now, pressing in on me from all sides. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. The air grew thick, as if the world itself was folding in on me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence was gone. The shadow disappeared into the night, leaving me standing there alone, my breath coming in short gasps. I had no idea what had just happened, but one thing was clear. I wasn't done. This was far from over. I returned inside, my mind racing with the weight of the encounter. What had that presence meant? What was it trying to say? I had been given a message, but I didn't fully understand it yet. The soldier had told me I was meant to see something. The symbol had guided me, but I still didn't know why. But then, as I lay in bed that night, something clicked. The presence, the shadow, had given me a clue. "You will understand," it had said. I was on the verge of something that would change everything. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was one last part of the puzzle I had to uncover. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it deep in my bones. The next day, I went back to the library, determined to find the missing piece. I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were out there, hidden in the pages of history, in the records of those who had come before me. I was searching for something, but I didn't know what. Hours passed as I sifted through books and records, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. And then, just as I was about to give up, I found it. In the back of a dusty old journal, hidden among forgotten pages, was the answer I had been searching for. It wasn't just a coincidence that I had disappeared. It wasn't just random. There was a reason, a deeper reason behind everything that had happened to me. And that reason was tied to the fabric of time itself. The journal spoke of an ancient order, a group of people who had learned how to manipulate time, to bend it to their will. These people were not just travelers through history, they were its guardians. They were tasked with protecting the timeline, ensuring that nothing disturbed the flow of time. But someone, or something, had been trying to break it, and I had been caught in the middle of it. The soldier, the presence, the symbol, they were all part of this order, part of the fight to protect the balance of time. And I had been chosen to join them. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this much. I was no longer just a bystander in my own life. I was part of something much bigger than myself. And whatever came next, I was ready for it.